The next big public protest against government austerity measures came just weeks before the riots. The J30 march was a large but peaceful march against pension cuts, featuring one union which had never taken strike action in its century-long history.
We've been in an organisation in various guises for 127 years. We have never taken national strike action. In 1979 we balloted for national action, but never a day such as this.
Meanwhile, across the pond in the United States, an idea was just beginning to form, and people were starting to cluster around it. By October, Occupy London had been formed and descended on the capital's financial district. The same climate of public opinion that birthed the Occupy movement also led to the riots being considered as more than just mindless violence. A national conversation began to take hold about capitalism and the current political and financial systems. There was a real sense of urgency about the debate. For 3 or 4 months towards the end of 2011 and the start of 2012, there was a feeling that we in Britain might be on the cusp of great changes, and Occupy was at the centre of this. At the time, there was optimism.
This is about creating a hub where people can come and start debating and discussing ideas about our society and where we want to take it. It's about understanding our society. It's about building a movement to challenge, the current powers in our society as well.
It was pretty tricky in the beginning to organize such a movement like this, but I think we did pretty well. As you can see around, we have a pretty good organization here. Of course, it's a work in progress, but I think things are going pretty well.
I've come down because I believe that the system that's currently in place is completely unsustainable, and it's putting huge pressure on the environment in extracting so many resources from this planet. We live on a finite planet. It can't go on forever, and we can't have continuous growth.
One of the messages which I think they have got across is we need to have a proper dialogue, a national dialogue about what we want from our economy, what we want from our society, what is just, what is not just, what respects people, what respects our environment. And I think they've done that because they've created this space within which a dialogue can happen.
People are asking their MPs what they're doing about the banking crisis. People are actually going onto the National Audit Office website, pulling off some of the reports and reading it. I have friends who have no interest in economics whatsoever, discussing the banking reforms. I think that's brilliant. Only good can come of it.
Occupy London could not have lasted forever, though. Movements based upon sit-ins and occupations always have a limited shelf life. After a few months, its own principles began to eat away at it. Occupy London never spoke with just one voice. Its lack of focus became a key weakness.
There are anarchist groups, right-wing anarchist groups, who think the government is too big, that we should not have bailed out the banks, we should have let them fail. That's something I can sympathise with. And that runs all the way through to left-wing anarchist groups who are paradoxically in favour of huge expansion of the government, expansion of the welfare state. So if you do go down there, you're not going to be short of opinions.
Support and attention ebbed away from the movement as their message stagnated and progress ground to a halt. As the months wore on, the Occupy camps in London were gradually dismantled and moved on. Occupy initially drew different voices together, but unable to coexist, they've now splintered apart. Occupy's overarching goals of a fairer economic system, with greater equality and more opportunities for those stuck in poverty, resonated with what many rioters said caused the riots. One Guardian newspaper poll saw 86% of rioters cite poverty as a key cause, ranking it higher than any other issue. It is economics that connects all of the major protests in the UK for the past several years. And yet, the government has taken relatively little notice when it comes to policy. What they have been seriously considering, though, is allowing the police to toughen up. In the wake of the riots, the furious majority of the public was calling for the police to be less passive and to take a harder line with rioters. They wanted swift, brutal justice. The government shared this sentiment, and the Home Secretary Theresa May commissioned a report to look at policing tactics. When the report was published at the end of 2011, it advocated the use of water cannons, rubber bullets, and even live firearms should the police feel a certain public order situation warranted it. This directly contradicted a report made by a parliamentary committee just weeks before, which stated that it could not recommend the use of such measures, and that they likely would have caused the riots to escalate had they been deployed.
Plastic bullets kill. They have killed 17 people in Northern Ireland. They are particularly dangerous when they're used against young people. A large number of the people who were on the streets during the August disturbances, they were young people. And if plastic bullets had been used in that situation, again, there is the potential that young people would have been seriously injured or even killed by those weapons. And that could not have helped the situation in any way.
I don't think on a practical level anyway, it's going to achieve what they want to achieve, because I think if you fire water cannons at people, what that means is they disperse. Now, they think that they're going to disperse and therefore they won't do anything. It means that they can go off in all different directions, and if the police were planning to arrest individuals, they wouldn't be able to do that because they'd get away anyway, wouldn't they? So I don't think it achieves their objectives anyway in having that.
There are substantial numbers of police officers who are trained in public order policing, who are trained to deal with people throwing missiles, people committing criminal damage by fire, even people attacking police officers by fire, and none of that training requires anything like rubber bullets or water cannons.
The motivation for putting these tools at the police's disposal may well be that their reputation will go before them, and people won't dare to riot again for fear of encountering them. But then again, water cannons and plastic bullets didn't stop protesters in Cairo from driving President Mubarak out of office. The Home Secretary is still considering whether or not to change the police's rules of engagement to allow the easy use of these weapons against crowds. Meanwhile, in riot-hit communities, people have simply had to pick themselves up and carry on. Even before the 2011 unrest, Tottenham was famous for the Broadwater farm riots of 1985. Some still remember the difficult recovery from that violence. And yet, the mood of Tottenham's residents 1 year on from the latest trouble is surprisingly optimistic.
The rebuilding is doing very, very well. I think as a community we've bonded more. We're now thinking of our children more, our community, and how we can best help the community.
It's one of those things where it was an awful thing and it was an awful time, but I think people have just come together as a group or a community, if you like, and just pick themselves up and they've just carried on with things.
The community's together, they're working together, they're building things, we've got a lot of things happening, there's a bond, there's a new spirit of unity in the community. And I think obviously the government need to work closer with the community leaders, to understand what's happening, because I think the youth have a message to the community and also to our leaders, but there's a way that obviously our leaders have awareness system to approach the community, and I think the government need to do a lot with the youth, to work a lot with the youth. I mean, I think they need to generate more money for the youth and put a lot of money for the community. And as you can see, they're doing road work, building new facilities, shopping centre, building the new stadium, which is going to generate work and economy. It's brilliant, so I'm actually quite excited.
I think there's been very positive work being carried out here recently, and I can see all the buildings that was damaged, and that was completely gutted out, are all being rebuilt steadily, and it's all looking very positive at the moment. I live around this area with the past 20 years, and definitely there's a lot of positive things happening there.
I was absolutely horrified to see Aldi's had just gone off the map, and the gentleman with all his tools in that shop, he'd built it up for so many years, but now it's rebuilt, so it's good to see it, and it's good that they are going to rebuild the historical building there at the corner of Lansdowne Road, so that's good news.
The 81-year-old local landmark at Lansdowne Road was famously wreathed in fire on the first night of violence. What was left of it was torn down the next day. Although no work has taken place yet, it is soon to be rebuilt in the same style as the old building. Many businesses in Tottenham have patched themselves up in the past year, with most opting to stay in the area. But buildings that were badly damaged enough to be torn down still haven't been rebuilt, although Aldi have planning permission for their new store. and the post office have abandoned their old location in favour of a rapid reopening just up the road. The shops that belong to big national chains bounce back quickly, but some small local businesses have found it harder than that.
Small businesses are getting loans from the banks, helping them to rebuild. There is still issues in regards to payouts from the insurance companies. However, I believe that people like David Lamley are, speaking on our behalf and doing their best to help deal with the situation.
I know some of the regenerational funding after is quite slow in coming through, and some of the buildings and businesses are still kind of waiting for funding to rebuild, for example, across the road. But I think it's coming along slowly and surely, but we are hoping for a lot more.
But beyond putting the bricks and mortar back together, what can be done to mend the social fabric and help those who seem to be so very alienated from British society feel respect and affection for their communities again?
I think if you had to find a silver lining to the riots, it would probably be that it's brought attention to those areas where there is massive deprivation, where young people and old are finding it very difficult to get jobs. And what I would hope to see a year later and also into the future is that rather than just excluding and turning away from these areas, we're actually investing in them and trying to give people jobs, trying to give people reasons to want to be part of that society and for them not want to be throwing their frustration around and getting angry. We need to invest in the societies that are important to us, and this is in particular 3 areas where we must do that.
There's plenty of opportunities in London Citizens. We could begin to apprentice some of these young people in terms of making furniture for some of the housing situations that are dire in this borough. So how do they begin to contribute to society and feel good about it? That they have not just been entertained or looked after or mentored or developed for themselves, but how can they feel a part of the local community now in terms of getting alongside carpenters and welders and plumbers and whatever else and learn skills and learn trades. And that's one of our ambitions in London Citizens.
Nothing has really been done to heal the social fabric after the riots. There's been a few programmes, a bit of money has been spent, but the real problem is you've got whole areas where young people have no prospect of getting a job, no prospect of getting a home, and yet they see the bankers completely screwing up the economy and walking away with their bonuses and their pensions all intact. And I think there's an anger that there's one law for a small elite in Britain, another for everybody else, and that's what fuelled those riots.
In the wake of the riots, David Cameron promised to turn around the lives of 120,000 so-called troubled families by 2015. An admirable, if vague, aim. But is it a relevant one?
I think there's a real lack of evidence really to support the focus on troubled families as a response to the riots. I mean, I think most local authorities who are responsible for identifying families at a local level find that there are some overlaps. There are some families who would have been supported, with intensive interventions that were already underway before the riots happened, who had children who may have been involved in the riots, or even adults that may have been in the riots. But I think the danger in that policy response was that it seems like a neat solution to something which is a very difficult, complex, messy problem, and that's why it's very appealing to politicians, because they can take this group of individuals, group of families in this case, point to them as being, in some way a part of the problem, and can then offer up a solution.
It is difficult for central government to create effective policies to deal with such a tiny minority of its citizens. So is it better to leave post-riots policy up to local bodies? They do, after all, know the areas where the troubles sprang up best.
In some cases there's been more of a lead at a local level in terms of designing responses to problems and involving communities in coming up with the types of services or responses they think are important. And we really need to see much more of that, because all the evidence suggests that those sorts of responses are much, much more effective in the long run.
You've got a government in which virtually everybody in the cabinet is a millionaire or a multi-millionaire. They have no understanding what it's like not to have a job, not to have a home, to face real pressures just making ends meet or putting food on the table. Much better to let local organisations actually operate the programmes that need to be put in place and distribute the money and all of that. Local people understand this. I mean, there's no way that all these rich millionaires who went to private schools and only met the working class people when they had them as servants can in any way tackle these problems.
Here in London, in Wandsworth, we have a council that somehow has to make decisions for 300,000 people. And we have a mayor who somehow has to deal with 8 million people's issues. And we have a government that somehow has to govern a nation of 60 million people. Just doesn't make sense on a rational basis. So I do feel that the issue is how do we get the local working well so that the city and the national level will work effectively.
Some community leaders in Tottenham say they tried to warn the police that the atmosphere was very tense prior to the riots and that some kind of disturbance was likely to happen soon. These warnings were not heeded, but are a good example of how community bodies see trouble brewing long before the authorities and why they should have a voice. Despite all of the positivity in Tottenham 1 year on, there is anger there if you scratch the surface. Some Tottenham residents are grateful that attention is at last being paid to the problems in their area, but resent the fact that their voices aren't being listened to. Olympic security measures, investment and policing are all sources of annoyance.
Why do you need rocket launch in top of flats? More taxpayers' money coming out of our pocket. You could have put that money in the community. Why now all of a sudden we have police everywhere? There's a lot of things that can be spoken about. There's a lot of anger. This community, there's a lot of anger in this community. Why? Because they are unsung heroes. They are voices that should be heard and not heard.
To struggle is one thing, but to struggle and have your cries for help ignored is quite another. There are young people who do not feel they have a voice because they do not feel represented in society. They don't feel politicians can speak for them.
It's clear that part of the motivation for the riots was young people feeling that they wanted to make their voices heard. Obviously they went about that in entirely the wrong way, but on the other hand, it attracted a huge amount of attention to this issue of young people not feeling like they do have a voice in society. So we do constantly need to make sure that policymakers, politicians, people at a local level are thinking about ways in which young people can have a say in their local communities and can feel part of their local communities.
And some of the things have been that we have started a leadership development program. How do we mentor young people to become better leaders? These are 16-year-olds, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. How do they become better leaders now and better leaders for the future so that they can begin to sit around tables that will be making decisions about communities and society in the future? So one program that we've begun is the leadership development program, mentoring young people. Another is that we are now liaising with the council in terms of asking for a young person to be around the platform where decisions are made by the council for the borough. So how can we have young people represented on those decision-making bodies?
And we need to be able to encourage young people to talk amongst themselves, talk to politicians, talk to community leaders. That's the best way you try and resolve issues around the riots and stop this frustration from manifesting itself. It's through communication, and that's the biggest tool that we can give to young people. It's about letting them have representation as much as possible and actually being able to influence the decisions that are made around them.
I do feel representation is critical, but I also feel that one of the things that young people I think could learn as part of their development and maturing is that the issues that they're passionate about are issues that other generations have been passionate about. And there are no quick fixes to these complex situations.
One group of young people who certainly won't feel any public sympathy is convicted rioters. But once they have served their sentences, they will come out into a world that will be even more difficult for them than before. In the current economic climate, their criminal convictions will cut their chances of finding work from slim to none. Perhaps it would be wiser to be forgiving and helpful to these people, instead of risking them becoming a criminal underclass.
I think these young people who have been convicted for the riots are going to find it difficult when they come out to get jobs. They are going to get screened out in the process, but I think as a society we need to try and encourage these young people back into positivity, back into work, and that's the only way we can really have this community cohesion and to make them feel like they have a place within the society that they've been brought up in. And so we need to invest in them rather than turning them away, probably when they need the most help.
But the spectre hanging over any progress made in the community is that of Mark Duggan. 12 months on, his family still have no answers. Mark's father died this year, still not knowing why the police killed his son. The IPCC have said they will finish their report this autumn, allowing an inquest finally to be held into Mark's death in early 2013. But even this inquest may be held in private. The handling of the whole affair is still a sore subject in Tottenham.
So obviously there's still anger in the community what happened. I'm yet to know actually what really happened. You know, all I know that a young man's life was taken away, a young man who has a future, and and there's also news that his dad's passed away as well. So yeah, so a lot of things happen in that family, a lot of things happen in the community. But obviously, the police have a way of informing people in the way they're going. I'm not angry at the police. At the end of the day, they're there to do their job. They are someone's mom, someone's dad, but there's a way at least they know they need to communicate with the community. They need to do more informing the community. They need to find some kind of structure, some kind of way to inform the community, especially young people. Young people have a way of understanding people. So there need to be more communication in the community. The police need to work close with the community, inform the community what's happening on a regular basis. Even though there's an investigation going on, they still need to come out and say, this is where we are so far and this is where we're on so far. And it would have helped very much.
These riots, although there's a lot of anger there, people suffering, it was the spark of the police shooting Mark Duggan, and now the cover-up that's followed that. The police that shot Mark Duggan are refusing to cooperate with the independent inquiry, refusing to make statements. You can imagine if a member of the public shot a police officer and refused to cooperate and make a statement, they wouldn't still be walking the streets.
No one has come up with a single overriding reason for why the rioters did what they did. Some were poor, disaffected, unemployed. Some had grudges against the police. Some were out for a laugh, for free stuff. Some were just amoral, violent thugs spoiling for a fight. The riots were not a simple affair. They were complex, messy, and defies simple explanation. Just like the society that spawned them. Perhaps it will not happen again. Perhaps it was simply a once-in-a-lifetime chance event.
I'd like to think so. When I lived here, when we had Broadwell Farm, which is kind of a bad phase, and it took a long while to get over that, I get the sense that we'll get over this one much more quickly, because I think there's a much better attitude and there's a lot more consensus in the community.
And so, sadly, I do feel that we'll have this sort of thing happen again until and unless we begin to address the systemic issues. And even then, I think there will be reaction to even the new systems that are set up, because I think that's in the nature of human beings.
I'm not necessarily convinced it's a once-in-a-generation issue and that the riots are never going to happen again. I think if we don't look at the serious deprivation that is taking place within the three areas where the riots happen the most, if we don't try and invest in our society, if we don't give people a stake in society, then there is always fuel for a riot to happen.
There's always the danger that heavy-handed policing will spark a riot. But do I think the riot's going to be a regular occurrence? No, I don't. It takes something to spark that anger, and it was the killing of a man who may well have been innocent.
Despite all of the optimism and good intentions, the reality is that 1 year on from the riots, construction hasn't even started in various places. 1 year on, the public still don't know why Mark Duggan died. And 1 year on, still no one can offer much more than speculation about why lawlessness descended for nights on end last summer. In these circumstances, the authorities cannot offer much meaningful reassurance that we won't see the same scenes repeated in coming summers. With the economy showing no signs of significant recovery, more unrest, be it riots, protests or marches, seems all but inevitable.